The committee meets today to receive testimony on the posture of U.S. Northern Command and U.S. Southern Command to inform its review of the Defense Authorization Request for fiscal year 2016. I'd like to extend our appreciation to the witnesses for their many years of distinguished service and to the soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, and their families who serve our nation with distinction. General Kelly, this is likely your final appearance before the committee in your current position, and I know how upset you are about that. But it must be said that the nation owes you the highest debt of gratitude for your more than 40 years of dedicated service, in which time you have given the most to our nation that can ever be asked of a military officer and a citizen. I know that I speak for my colleagues when I say that your candor has been as refreshing as it has been valuable to the work we do on the committee, and I implore my colleagues to pay close attention to your testimony today and to heed your warnings to us. It is my sincere hope that your service to the nation will continue for many years to come. Over the last month, the committee has heard from some of the nation's most respected leaders on the current global security environment, and their testimony has been crystal clear. Our nation faces the most complex and challenging array of threats it has in over a half a century. This situation in our own hemisphere is no exception. Compounding the enormous security challenges facing our nation is the looming threat of sequestration, which is having a devastating impact on the readiness and capabilities of our men and women in uniform. Retired General Jim Mattis rightly told this committee last month, quote, "No foe in the field can wreak such havoc on our security that mindless sequestration is achieving today." I expect our witnesses to candidly update the committee on what sequestration will mean for their ability to accomplish their missions and protect the force. More starkly, we'd like to know at what point does sequestration push us beyond accepting risk and towards mission failure. Admiral Gortney, this is your first time testifying before the committee as the commander of U.S. Northern Command and North American Aerospace Defense Command. After nearly 4 months in command, I look to your assessment of the challenges within your area of responsibility, as well as your strategy to confront them. I am particularly interested in your views on the current state of U.S.-Mexican security cooperation and ways in which our two nations can strengthen this vital partnership. Though the President of Mexico's efforts against transnational organized crime have resulted in some notable successes, including the removal of several senior cartel leaders from the battlefield, the security situation remains highly volatile and continues to directly impact the security of our southern border, as well as more than 1,200 American cities where these ruthless criminal networks now operate. Additionally, with North Korea moving closer to an operational road mobile ICBM and Iran publicly stating it intends to launch as early as this year a space launch vehicle capable of ICBM ranges, it's all the more important that the United States expand and modernize its homeland ballistic missile defense system. I support the increase of ground-based interceptors from 30 to 44 by 2017, but we need to be assured that the planned improvements to the ground-based mid-course defense system will stay ahead of the ballistic missile threats to our homeland that are anticipated by the intelligence community. General Kelly, the situation within your area of responsibility represents as complex and challenging a set of problems as I have ever seen in the hemisphere. While there are important success stories like Colombia, the situation in many other parts of the region remain highly unstable. We are all particularly concerned about Central America, which is mired by feeble governance and weak security institutions, high rates of corruption, and is home to several of the most violent countries in the world. Increasingly capable transnational criminal organizations exploit these shortcomings and command multi-billion-dollar global networks that traffic in weapons, drugs, bulk cash, human beings, and anything that will earn a profit. Increasingly, their activities directly threaten our national security. Working with our regional partners to arrest the troubling rise in instability must be a priority. I agree with you, General Kelly, that our approach to Central America requires a sustained multi-year commitment similar to what we pursued under Plan Colombia. I hope you will describe in greater detail what a planned Central America should look like and what role Southern Command would play in such an effort. Additionally, I remain troubled by the lack of appropriate and persistent U.S. support and engagement in the Western Hemisphere and how sequestration would further erode our already limited presence and programs in the region. We cannot afford to go on treating our own neighborhood as our lowest geographic priority, which only receives the level of resources and focus that it deserves when it erupts into crisis. This is a recipe for failure, and I know you feel the same way. In closing, I want to ask you, General Kelly, to pass on the deepest thanks and gratitude of the members of this committee to the military men and women conducting detention operations at Guantanamo Bay. Putting aside politics and the broader debate about the future of this detention facility, the Americans serving there today deserve our utmost appreciation. Theirs is an extraordinarily trying and difficult mission, and through it all they continue to serve honorably and with the utmost professionalism. So, General, please extend our thanks to them. Thank you again for our witnesses for appearing before us today. Senator Reid.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Let me join you in welcoming our witnesses and thank General Kelly for his extraordinary service and his advice and counsel over many years. And welcome, Admiral Gortney. This is your first appearance in your role as the NORTHCOM commander. And let me also ask you to thank the men and women under your command and their families, because it is families serve, not just individual servicemen and women. And no one has served more, as the Senator has pointed out, than the Kelly family. So thank you, General Kelly. Admiral Gortney, as you know, one of the three pillars of our defense strategy, as laid out in last year's quadrennial defense review, is to protect the homeland, to deter and defeat attacks on the United States, and to support civil authorities in mitigating the effects of potential attacks and natural disasters. Similarly, President Obama's national security strategy, released last month, emphasizes the defense of our homeland as a primary responsibility. This, simply stated, is your very important mission. To that end, while Admiral Haney, the commander of SOUTHCOM, is responsible for synchronizing global missile defense planning and operations support, you are responsible for the operation of our Homeland Ballistic Missile Defense System. And we look forward to hearing about the improvements that are planned for the ground-based missile defense system, the progress being made to test, correct, and field additional interceptors, the enhancement of sensors and discrimination capabilities, and the status of the redesigned kill vehicle. In addition, NORTHCOM works closely with other federal agencies, the governors and the National Guard, to collaborate on responding to natural and man-made disasters, and partners with Canada and Mexico to promote security across our borders. I look forward to hearing also about your current efforts and how these would be impacted by the return of sequestration. In Southern Command, one of the primary threats is posed by illegal narcotics trafficking and organized criminal networks. These organizations create devastating instability in nations throughout our hemisphere, including the corruption of civilian and security institutions and brutal violence inflicted upon the people of the region. Whether it is illegal drugs for sale or individuals escaping violence in their hometowns, the consequences of crime do not stop at the border, and what often starts as SOUTHCOM's problem soon becomes NORTHCOM's problem. An obvious answer then is to address the problem at its root, but complicating SOUTHCOM's ability to respond is the fact that sequestration has reduced the military services support of your requirements and reduced the funding in the defense-wide counter-drug account. In your submitted opening statement, General Kelly, you characterized the impact of these reductions as, quote, managing to keep the pilot light of U.S. military engagement on in the region, but just barely. This is a stark warning, and one that is certainly amplified when considering the cuts on the civilian side of our government as well. General Kelly, given the physical constraints that are likely to face you, I'm interested in your insights into how SOUTHCOM can successfully engage in the region. For example, SOUTHCOM is also training and equipping security forces of friendly nations, training and equipping peacekeepers for deployment to peacekeeping operations across the globe, and enabling, advising, and supporting Colombian military and law enforcement operations. These activities often provide benefits far beyond the investment. How can we leverage these low-cost, high-yield activities? Are there other innovative ideas we should be implementing? General Kelly, Admiral Gortney, you are both exceptional officers who I'm glad are leading these commands, and I look forward to your testimony. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Welcome. Admiral Gortney, do you want to be first, or General Kelly?
That means I should go first.
We're longtime shipmates. Well, Chairman McCain, Ranking Member Reed, members of the committee, thank you so much for having my shipmate and myself here to talk to you today. It means a great deal. In preparing for today, I first thought I'd open with a summation of my prepared remarks that I had forwarded for the record. But after spending over the past 2 weeks time with you, thank you for giving me your valuable time. I think the time would be better spent if we talk about the threats that, as I see them, in the defense of the homeland and how it affects us. So I'm going to set my prepared remarks aside, and I want to talk to those threats. And when we look at threats, we look at threats from the most likely to the most dangerous. And so I want to talk about from the most likely to the most dangerous threats to the homeland. And I think the most likely threat is that transnational criminal network that is using the seams between General Kelly's and my COCOMs and PACOMs, our interagency partners and us, seams between us and our partner nations, and the seams within those countries themselves. In those seams, people are moving drugs, money, as the chairman said. They're just moving product for profit. And through those seams, we need to close those seams, because in those seams, if someone wants to move something that is going to do great damage to our nation, that is where they will come. The second is homegrown violent extremists. And it's a very effective, I'm sorry to say, but sophisticated social media campaign to stir up distrust from American citizens to do harm to American citizens. The third is cyber. I'm responsible for defending my known networks and to help the lead federal agency in the aftermath of a cyber attack. But it's far more significant in that it would directly affect a cyber attack against a critical infrastructure that I rely on to defend the nation, and we rely on for our nation to operate. I see that as a significant threat. The next is the North Korean threat, who has the intent, and we assess the capability to shoot a ballistic missile at our homeland, and of course whether Iran will continue on its path. And finally, and the most dangerous, China to Russia. However, as significant as those threats are, as I look at most likely and most dangerous, I see the most likely and most dangerous threat to my ability to protect the homeland, and that is sequestration. And it's because of how sequestration affects the forces that John and myself and our shipmates that are the other geographic combatant commanders, how it affects the services as they implement the sequestration effect, how it hollows out the force. The services can only go have to generate the revenue to meet the sequestration. They must go into the readiness accounts, and which leads to a hollow force. And as Admiral Greenert said to you a couple days ago, it delays capability that prevents us from outpacing the threats that is our technological and our advantage in the future battlefield. As NORTHCOM and General Kelly and SOUTHCOM, we rely on the services in order for us to do our mission. Our forward deployed commanders, they rely on that capability. And the specific impacts to each one of the missions, I'd like to answer in the questions, and I look forward to your questions.
Chairman McCain, Ranking Member Reed, distinguished members of the committee, thanks for the opportunity to speak here today about SOUTHCOM's soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, Coast Guardsmen, and just as importantly, the civilian workforce. It's great to be here with my good friend, Admiral Gortney, and I can assure you, as he just did, that there is really no gap, no seam, no space between our two organizations. We work very closely together, and we collaborate very, very closely together. I believe SOUTHCOM is the only government organization that is 100% dedicated to looking at the issues of Latin America and the Caribbean. My folks don't just pay attention to what's going on in this regional world, they understand it intimately. They care about it, and they support it. They've helped countries in Latin America improve human rights, worked hand in hand with the region to professionalize security and defense forces, and rebuild institutions. And they've supported our partners as they win back their streets and countries from drug trafficking and criminal networks, much of which is directly attributable to the drug demand in the United States. I'm proud to lead this outstanding group of people, and I'm proud of the work we're doing in Latin America. As the committee knows, I think, SOUTHCOM's most important mission is to protect the southern approaches to the United States. We do not and cannot do this mission alone. We work side by side with law enforcement professionals in the Department of Homeland Security, the Coast Guard, DEA, FBI, and the Department of Treasury. Together, we all defend the U.S. homeland against transnational criminal networks, illicit trafficking, and the potential movement of terrorists, or WMD, into the homeland. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to take a moment to commend one of our most valued partners in the U.S. government, that is the Central Intelligence Agency. I've had the honor of serving with the CIA all over the world for my entire career, and this includes Iraq and Latin America. Like our men and women in uniform, I believe that the men and women of the CIA are the best of their generation. When our country needs them most, the CIA always answers the call. They do what the President asks them to do, as we all do, and they do it with a selflessness and a bravery that is very, very seldom recognized. They step forward without question, without hesitation, with the knowledge they will receive zero recognition for the important work that they do. They willingly put their lives on the line every day. They serve in some of the world's darkest and most dangerous places, executing the most complex, high-risk missions imaginable, and most often they do it armed only with their wits. Along with our armed forces, law enforcement, and intelligence agencies, the CIA is part of an extraordinary team doing essential work to keep our nation safe, and I believe most of our citizens sleep safe at night because of what the entire team does, and that team starts overseas with what the CIA does. I'd also like to say a few words about our partners in Latin America, one relationship in particular. Mr. Chairman, members, as you know, the United States has a very special relationship with a handful of countries around the world. These relationships are with countries that we rely on as regional stabilizers. These countries are our strongest friends and most steadfast allies. They look at life and live their lives in the same way that we do. Colombia clearly plays that role in Latin America. But they're more than just among our most trusted partners. They are the model for winning the fight against violent insurgencies in criminal networks. Colombia has shown us that the key to defeating terrorists and criminal groups is by upholding and defending the very values that these groups threaten: freedom, democracy, and the protection of human rights. Colombia has shown us that security and economic prosperity really do go hand in hand. And at great expense in Colombian blood and Colombian national treasure, they've shown us what the term national will really means. In my 30 years in uniform, over 30 years in uniform, I've never seen a better success story than what I see every day in Colombia. It's one place I believe we got it right, where our support, coupled with a committed partner, brought a country back from the brink, where our engagement in Latin America made a real and lasting difference that's plain to see. Colombia is now stable, thriving, and taking on greater responsibilities to improve international security, not just in Latin America and the Caribbean, but they're looking overseas as well. In an uncertain and turbulent world, we're lucky to have partners like Colombia. I'd like to thank the committee for its continued support to the Colombian people as they work to achieve a just and lasting peace, which is just about in sight. Members of the committee, I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, General. We're now looking at a proposal for a budget that leaves the sequestration numbers in the numbers as they have been following since we passed the Budget Control Act. If that remains the case, General Kelly, what is your view of what sequestration will do to your ability to carry out your mission and the impact and an increased risk to the lives of American men and women serving in uniform?
Thanks for that question, Senator. I would tell you in Latin America and Southern Command, it will be, just simply put, a catastrophe. It will essentially put me out of business. I have very, very little to work with now. We do most of our work partnering small groups of soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, even law enforcement that go down, spend short periods of time advising, assisting many of these groups, whether it's maintenance, human rights, these kind of things. I've queried my components, the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines. Their cuts would range from anywhere between 75%, in the case of the Marines, maybe about 25%. But the point is, I will no longer be able to partner almost at all with the nations that we work with every day. From a drug flow point of view, we got collectively, the DOD and all of the agencies that do this, we got 158 metric tons of cocaine last year without violence before it ever even made it to Central America. I do that with very, very few ships. I know that if sequestrations happen, I will be down to maybe 1 Coast Guard, maybe 2 Coast Guard cutters. That means of the 158 tons I would expect to get this year, I probably, if I'm lucky, will get 20 tons. And all the rest of it just comes into the United States along this incredibly efficient network. So, catastrophe, Senator.
And the risk to the lives of the men and women serving?
In my part of the world, it will be, to say the least, a heightened risk. And again, I'm in a part of the world, as you know, sir, that is relatively peaceful, that there is no real state-on-state problems. But in other parts of the world, like CENTCOM and EUCOM, potentially, these are, you know, we could be talking, in my opinion, as just one guy talking, we could be talking not high risk anymore or severe risk to our plans, but really we could be talking defeat if sequestration happens.
Admiral Gortney, same question.
I'll pile on to what General Kelly was saying. In the similar role in the countering the transnational criminal networks and our ability to do mill-to-mill training with our partners, particularly in Mexico and in the Bahamas, it's going to have a huge impact. We execute those missions through service-retained forces. As soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines, and Coast Guardsmen are training for their own future deployment, they come down and do that mill-to-mill activity for us, work for us, but it's training they receive. And we've received from our components that training is going to have to be curtailed significantly. So that will have a huge impact on us on that. The other impact would be in missile defense. Because the services can only generate the revenue by going into readiness or delaying delivery of a capability, the Missile Defense Agency does not have a readiness account that they can go to. So they're going to have to go to their new starts. They'll have to put the long-range discrimination radar, the improvements to the advanced kill vehicle and a multi-object kill vehicle. They'll have to put those on hold and will delay the ability for them to field those capabilities, which allows us to outpace the growing proliferation of ballistic missiles. And so those are the two primary impacts to me, sir.
Thank you. General Kelly, in your written statement, you said, quote, "In addition to thousands of Central Americans fleeing poverty and violence, foreign nationals from countries like Somalia, Bangladesh, Lebanon, and Pakistan are using the region's human smuggling networks to enter the United States. While many are merely seeking economic opportunity or fleeing war, a small subset could potentially be seeking to do us harm. Last year, ISIS adherents posted discussions on social media calling for the infiltration of the U.S. southern border." Can you tell us how serious you think that threat is?
I think, Senator, that the kind of people that you're referring to will of course, their intent is to do us the greatest amount of harm possible. This network that Bill and I deal with every day, not to mention the law enforcement folks, is so efficient that if a terrorist or almost anyone wants to get into our country, they just pay the fare. No one checks their passports. No one, you know, they don't go through metal detectors. No one cares why they're coming. They just ride this network. And if someone wanted to come in here with nuclear material, I was just down at Emory University at the Ebola facility there, talking about how Ebola spreads and potentially could be used as a weapon. It's a scary proposition when I think of this network.
So how serious, in your view, is it that over time there may be an effort by terrorists to cross our southern border?
Extremely serious.
I thank you, General Kelly, and I thank you for your honorable service, and thank you, Admiral.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I think the Chairman's questions, your answers, has really illustrated the critical and corrosive effect of sequestration on everything you do, literally everything you do. But I think there's a point that also has to be emphasized, because you don't do things alone. You do it with other agencies, some of them civilian agencies. General Kelly, you just said you were down in Emory at CDC talking about the potential of a Ebola-type epidemic being transported into the United States. The border is the jurisdiction primarily of the Department of Homeland Security. I could go on and on and on. So the question is, because there's been some discussion of, well, we need relief for the Department of Defense, and both Senator McCain and I have urged that. But without relief across the board, without funding for DHS, Department of Justice, FBI, CDC, can you do your mission, Admiral Gortney?
Sir, thank you for asking that question. As we look at how we perform the range of missions that we've been assigned, our homeland partnerships, our interagency partnerships with the interagency Homeland Security, with the law enforcement efforts, that's actually our center of gravity. The National Guard, our governors, et cetera. But to your point on those interagency relationships are absolutely critical. Those interdependencies, many of which I am supporting to them, but I am still tasked to do that. Should they be affected, it's going to have a significant effect against how I'm able to do my missions to support them, and then again to defend the homeland. General Kelly,
Your response?
I'd associate myself with that. If this is a team effort, and if any of us get hit with a sequestration type impact, again, the defense of the homeland is, to me, absolute, and it would be seriously degraded.
There are other aspects, that, not just reactive, but proactive. I'm told that, for example, the Millennium Challenge, which is a quasi-federal agency, gets some funding from us, has been significant in terms of road building and economic development in your area of operations. And I would assume that's just, and sometimes just as important as the reactive defensive measures. Is that accurate?
It is, yes, sir. I mean, we could get into a long discussion about what we're trying to do in the Central American region to stabilize the region so that we don't have another occurrence of 100,000 migrants coming up all at once. In the Millennium Challenge Corporation, things like that, or the Inter-American Developmental Bank. Those are organizations that we should invest in because they do it right in terms of economic development and working with countries and identifying projects that will everything from stabilize their national institutions to economic development to social development, protect human rights, things like that. I really believe that investment in those kind of organizations is the way to go, as opposed to, we try to do our own standalone type investments because they don't seem to work very well.
Thank you. Admiral Gortney, you are the operational, effectively, commander for missile defense. Missile Defense Agency does all the sophisticated development. You've pointed out how they would be harmed. But from your sense as you described, the trigger puller, what should be the priorities in terms of investment in national missile defense?
Well, my priorities are completely aligned with Admiral Searing's from the Missile Defense Agency. And the priorities actually are concurrent priorities. All three have to be taken into account. The first is we need to continue to improve our sensors. The sensors are the ability for us to discriminate and track as early as possible to be able to defeat the threat. The second is we need to enhance the lethality of our kill vehicles. It's a very expensive proposition to shoot a rocket with a rocket, and so we want every one of our kill vehicles to be as effective and as lethal as possible, and as well as the means to develop other ways that we can get more kill vehicles into space. And the last is, as in any weapon system, you need to invest in the sustainment piece of it so that it's a system of systems, and all of the systems are at their peak physical condition, and that includes the ability for us to test and exercise them. And they all have to be done concurrently.
And so these priorities are higher, I can assume, than expanding the basing of missiles around the country?
Yes, Admiral Searing and I are in agreement that before we put additional money, we want to make sure we assure the three that we just talked about. That's the most important piece.
Thank you very much, Admiral. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, I'm recognized, I think. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think both of you were watching a couple of weeks ago when we had Secretary Carter here, and you're familiar with his testimony wherein one of the statements was readiness remains at troubling levels across the force, that even with the FY budget, the Army, Navy, and Marine Corps won't reach their readiness goals until 2020, and the Air Force 2023. And then General Dempsey stated that what we need to remain at the lower ragged edge of manageable risk in our ability to execute the defense strategy. Now, do both of you agree with these statements? The defense planning requirements are that you guys are the one that are in charge of Homeland Security, and that's supposed to be our #1 requirement, #1 guidance. Is that correct?
Homeland Defense, sir.
Homeland Defense,
Yes,
yeah. Well, the requirements are found in the Homeland Defense. That's correct. What concerns me is that for the past 14 years, I think that everyone's aware, and you're certainly aware, that both of your areas of responsibility have been prioritized behind the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Well, that's a big deal. I don't think many people out there in the real world or in America understand that, sir, we understand that our top priority should be Homeland Defense. Everyone understands that. But what the budget, forgetting about sequestration, bringing us up to where we are today, has taken away your ability or that priority for Homeland Defense. And I think it's something that we have to be talking about up here. Or do you think, I'd ask both of you, in your opinions, are already accepting too much risk as it relates to our #1 priority, Homeland Defense?
I'll take that, sir. You know, the way we execute, the way and the means that we execute Homeland Defense is an away game. It's better to fight the fight at the further reaches through the forward deployed geographic commanders, such as General Kelly here. And the challenge that we're having, even though we've been in 14 years of war, as we come out of these wars, you're usually entering a better security situation than when you went into war. That's why we went to war. But as Dr. Kissinger testified to you a few weeks ago, clearly that's not what we had, and we just didn't predict it even 3 short years ago. And the forward deployed combatant commanders, each and every single one of them are dealing with a crisis in their AOR on their doorsteps today. And they're seeking, and they need, in order for them to defend the nation and the far game, they need the forward deployed forces and the forward base forces to deal with those crises, get them into an off-ramp, and not let them escalate any more than they already are. And that's where the risk is. They own that risk, and that's their ability to execute that mission is very tattered because of how thin we are, because we have to distribute them globally. And as the service chief said, our ability to surge them greater capability from the homeland, so the fight is still overseas, is reduced. And how that also impacts is those service members that are executing that mission.
All right, Admiral.
Their risk and the acceptable losses have gone up significantly.
Well, Admiral, and I appreciate the answer. It's a very good answer. It's a long way of saying yes. And so do you agree with that, General Kelly?
I do, yes, sir.
Okay. General Kelly, the area that I'm really familiar with, I spent 20 years of my life in the building and developing down in South Texas. I'm familiar, not with the rest of the border, but the Texas border I am. And you talk about, you said, I wrote it down here, your people understand it intimately. Included in what they understand intimately, does that include the border, the Texas-Mexico border?
No, sir, not in my case. My boundary ends with the South Mexican border.
Okay.
So Bill's your guy.
Yeah. Oh, well, yeah, all right. Are they very familiar with that? The reason I say that, there's danger on the border down there. In fact, it's misunderstood because it's mostly between 2 cartels or 2 drug groups firing. One of the few places on that border where people can go over from the United States was a little community called Progreso. And even the other day, that ended up a battleground. Is everyone on top of that and familiar with that and aware of the risk that gives some of our people?
Yes, sir. Everybody's aware of the risk. Do we have 100% visibility into everything of that? No, sir, we don't. We work that very, very hard with our interagency partners, Homeland Security, and our interagency partners inside Mexico. And our responsibility is to expand the capacity through training with the Army, the Navy, and their Marine Corps, Sedena and Samar.
Okay, I've got a problem with my timing here, and I did want to get into some statements that have been made. General Kelly, you talked about on Gitmo, the history of that, when we got it, the good deal it is even today, and what all is there other than the incarceration of terrorists that are down there. So I'm going to ask you this question for the record, and because I am very interested in some of the other things that are going on down there. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I want to thank both of you for being here. General Kelly, I know this is your last time that you will be here as SOUTHCOM commander. And my father-in-law was a Guadalcanal Marine. And I think if he was still around, he would say, if you want to know what a Marine is, look at General Kelly. So we're very grateful for your service. And Admiral Gortney, my dad was in the Navy. He chipped a lot of paint. He didn't see a lot of admirals, but he'd be very grateful for your service. To General Kelly, when you look, one of the things we're dealing with in my home state of Indiana is there's been a huge influx of heroin into our state. And I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about the challenges you face in trying to interdict that and trying to stop it. And what is maybe the best thing we could do to help you in that effort?
Senator, the first thing everyone needs to understand is really 100% of the heroin that's consumed in the United States, and we in fact are right in the middle of a heroin epidemic, a drug epidemic. A lot of people in this town will say no to that, but we are in the middle of a serious epidemic, particularly when it comes to heroin. So 100% of it is produced here in the here in Latin America. About half of it is produced in Mexico, and the rest of it is produced further south in various parts of the Central American Isthmus and South America. It's a relatively small amount, 40, 50 tons, we think, of heroin that feeds the heroin epidemic in the United States. What's the first step in stopping it? Stopping the drug demand in the United States. That's the first step, and I don't think we take that very seriously as we do, say, tobacco use and seatbelt use and things like that. So we don't do much to reduce the demand in the United States. If we did that, there would be less of a market for it, obviously. But because of this network, and I say it a lot, this network has got to be broken. And the way the network stays in place is drug demand, primarily drug demand in the United States, and then the unbelievable profits that come out of that drug demand. Cocaine alone, $85 billion a year in profits from cocaine sales alone in the United States. And of course, that's an unlimited amount of money to either bribe officials in our own country as well as in Latin America, or to kill people, or have people killed. And until we really get around the drug demand issue, there's not an awful lot we're going to be able to do to that network.
Is there anything you can do on the ground in terms of interdiction? Any other things that we can help you with? Obviously, resources, but what is the key to their success in getting that into our country?
It's just years and years and years of a very, very elaborate development of this very elaborate, very efficient network. Some of the things we do, and I'll go back to Colombia for a second. I mean, Colombia is absolutely heroic in their attempts to eradicate coca and poppy before it's ever harvested. They knocked down about 1,400 jungle laboratories last year that make cocaine and make heroin. And they themselves, cocaine alone, 150 tons before it ever left of cocaine, before it ever left Colombia on its way north. So Colombia is deep into the fight. In fact, they frankly do more to fight drugs in our country than I think the United States does sometimes. Further north, in these countries that we're trying to help in Central America, where an awful lot of the poppies are in fact grown, We're just starting to see these countries, their security forces able to stand up on their own. And then Mexico, about 50% of the heroin consumed in the United States is the poppies are grown and the heroin is produced in Mexico, and that's really Bill's bailiwick.
In terms of interdiction, you had mentioned about the Coast Guard cutters and other resources that you have. I may be mistaken with the exact number, but I thought last year you told us you were able to, or had the physical capability to stop about 25% of the traffic that came through.
We're stopping, we think, about 20%.
Okay.
With very few cutters. More cutters, more ships mean we get more, less means less.
So it's simply a direct, your ability to stop is simply a direct correlation to the resources that you have in that area.
That's correct, sure.
Okay. Could you give us a little bit of a primer for a few seconds on Venezuela and what's going on there right now?
It's a sad thing to watch. 2 years ago when I took this job, the discussion was how long would it be before it collapses or implodes. I mean, I think we're kind of there. Inflation rates of over 80%. There's almost nothing on the shelves that common people can buy. The government there is, to say the least, restricting the free press more and more every day. They're arresting opposition leaders. Of course, they're blaming us for everything from coup planning to this recent move by our president to put sanctions, not sanctions, but to put restrictions in place. They see that as an attempt to topple the government. They don't need any help toppling their government. I mean, it's just a really, really sad state of affairs to watch.
Thank you. Thank you both very, very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I also want to thank both of the members of the panel for their distinguished service to our country. Admiral Gortney, it was great seeing you in Alaska recently. I wanted to dig into a little bit more on the Arctic strategy that's highlighted in your testimony, and I actually really appreciate how much emphasis you've been given that in your new position and in your testimony. You know, one of the things that I think has come up in a lot of the hearings here, whether it's General Dempsey or the Secretary Carter's growing importance, but also kind of the fluidity of what's going on in the Arctic, particularly with regard to the Russian moves that I know you've been keeping an eye on. As a matter of fact, your testimony mentions the aggressiveness that we haven't seen since the Cold War in terms of the bomber runs. As you know, they're building new airfields in the Arctic. They have a new Arctic command. General Dempsey testified last week, 4 new Arctic combat brigades being deployed by the Russians in the Arctic, a huge icebreaker fleet with as many as 11 more new icebreakers. So they're clearly seen as a strategic area for the world, resource development, new sea lanes that are developing there. And my concern is that we're well behind the Russians in terms of this, not only as an opportunity, but also as a growing area of military competition that they're clearly making it out to be. I'll give you a few examples on that. You know, our Army is looking at reducing, in the light of what the Russians are doing, reducing 2 combat brigades based in Alaska. That's a big concern. I just have a couple questions that they're all kind of related, so I'll just pose them to you. Do we have an Arctic O plan right now, and how would the Army troops in the Arctic, in Alaska, fit into that, and does it make sense to significantly reduce our military presence in the Arctic before we even put out an O plan, and in the face of what clearly is a Russian dramatic increase in the militarization of the Arctic? You know, General Odierno mentioned yesterday in testimony before the Appropriations Committee that he was waiting on NORTHCOM's Arctic strategy to kind of get a sense of what they're going to do with troop levels. So you talk about seams. As you and I have discussed, Alaska is really at the seams of NORTHCOM, PACOM, EUCOM, and sometimes that's helpful. Other times I think we can have our strategy fall through the seams. Can you just comment on that, please?
Yes, I'm assigned to be the advocate of the Arctic, which is not a doctrinal term. It's not, I can't direct anybody to do anything, but we are working on answering that question, what are the requirements that we're going to need to be able to inform our own operational plans, as you mentioned, on the future of the Arctic, and then what we feel are recommendations for all of DoD, not just the services, for what necessary investments that get up there.
Great, because, you know, another thing that kind of, it looks like it's falling through the seams, at least within DoD and outside the DoD, is icebreakers. When the CNO was here last week, talked about the importance of those. Everybody agrees they're important, and yet the Navy's not in charge of those. It's the Coast Guard. So there doesn't seem to be a coordinated focus on that as well.
Which goes to the impact of our interagency relationships and the impact of sequestration. The Coast Guard is responsible for the icebreakers. We don't, as CNO said, we don't have any ships up there, but that float on top of the ocean. But we have submarines up there quite frequently. But we need to figure out what are the capabilities that we need, because it's a very harsh place. I mean, I love visiting your state, but it's a hard place. It's a hard place to live and operate, and we have the difficulty, we have the inability right now to reliably navigate, communicate, and then sustain ourselves as we're up there. So that's what we're trying to answer. Well, we will endeavor to answer as the advocate, and that report will be due out this spring, sir.
Great, thank you. And I do think the hardness actually makes for great training, whether it's the Marines or the Army or the Navy, Air Force out there. I'd like to turn to missile defense. You know, I think your testimony highlights the growing threat, the ICBM threat, whether it's from North Korea, whether it's from Iran, you know, even potentially with, you know, weapons of mass destruction in the future. Can you just comment on the role that Fort Greely plays in that and how important it is to continue the focus, I think, which is a bipartisan focus here on increased missile defense?
Absolutely. You know, the strategic location of Alaska cannot be overstated. Location, location, location. It's easier to deploy forces from, say, our F-22s that are based there around the world. They get wherever we need to put them quicker than, say, we launch them out of Langley. So the strategic importance of Alaska can't be overstated. And as a result of that, that's where the Missile Defense Agency decided to put the vast majority of our interceptors up at Fort Greely, which we were just up there visiting about a month ago. We're on track. The first missile field, there's 3 missile fields, as you're aware. The first was a test and evaluation. They're refurbishing that, and by the end of 2017, we'll have all 40 missiles up there, which brings our numbers to 44. There's nothing preventing us from getting there to maximize the investment that we've made for the effectiveness of our missile defense program.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I want to join our chairman in thanking both of you for your distinguished service, but particularly General Kelly. Thank you for your candid and thoughtful and insightful remarks, but also for your and your family's service to our nation, which, as the chairman said so eloquently, should elicit our gratitude, and certainly members of the committee feel it. You mentioned the porousness of our borders and the efficiency of the network that can transport drugs and people into this country. As you may know, the Senate is now debating, with uncertain prospects, a bill that would provide greater assistance to the victims of human trafficking. And as a strong supporter and leading co-sponsor of that measure, I'm very interested in what can be done by both of your commands in stopping the flow of women and children who are exploited for sex and slave labor. This kind of trafficking is modern slavery, in effect. And you've spoken very powerfully on the importance of human rights and the rule of law as it's been vindicated in Colombia. I wonder what can be done, in your view, in Central America, where the flow of both drugs and human trafficking has gone in the wake of success in Colombia. Perhaps you can give us your general comment on the trafficking issue.
Thanks for the question, Senator. It's a really important one, and my answer is not a military one for sure. It's to give the people from that part of the world a reason to stay home. all of the polling and all the indicators are they prefer to stay where their families are, where their culture is, where they're comfortable, but without better human rights, and that is getting better in these countries, without some access to economic well-being, and I think that is the key, without lowering of the violence, basically due to a large degree to our drug consumption. And the countries are, in fact, getting their arms around that. It's controversial in some respects how they're doing it, but the violence is going down, and the human rights accusations of violations are not going up, and that's hugely important in the way they're doing business there. Again, we sometimes in our interagency criticize the way people get at problems locally, but the fact is they're getting at the problems. But really, the answer is they won't leave if they can get a job and live a decent life. We know that.
And as you said, the solution isn't going to be exclusively military, although law enforcement is a part of it. And I think Senator Reid in his remarks made the point that sequestration in affecting the non-Department of Defense aid and functions in those areas is important in fighting the flow of human trafficking as well. Is that correct?
Yes, sir, it is.
Admiral, I wonder if you, in your command, have any insights into stopping the flow of trafficking?
Yes, sir. We work very closely in the mill-to-mill relationship with both SEDENA and SAMAR because they've been asked by their government to go after some of the internal challenges that they have. And so we have been very, very effective. And in the last 24, 36 months, a significant change and an increase in receptiveness and desire to partner with us and work with us and help them train to be more effective. And I just received, and we've just started on a path to really assist their efforts on their southern border, because as they said, if we fix our southern border, it'll help us so many challenges inside of our country. And that's why the impact of sequestration will cut back that ability, the amount of mill-to-mill training capacity that we'll be able to give them so that they can assist and make their country better.
In effect, the result of sequestration is a kind of ripple effect that affects not only our military readiness, but also the impacts we can have on cultural and governance change for the better in these countries that eventually affects us, because trafficking of drugs and slave labor across our borders affects our quality of life as well.
Absolutely. As General Kelly said, this is a team sport. It requires unity of effort, whole of government, things we speak to infrequently, but are just such a huge part of how we deal with our partners to our southern border.
My time has expired. I want to thank you both for your testimony here today. Thank you, and thank you for your service.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you very much, Admiral Gortney and General Kelly. We really appreciate your service to our country. I'm mindful of the ongoing search and rescue efforts in connection with the soldiers and Marines who were involved in the helicopter crash off the coast of Florida in the last 2 days. And our prayers go out to them and to their family members. General Kelly, you stated last year that the threats associated with the drug trade and with the flow of undocumented immigrants across our southern border presented an existential threat to the national security of the United States. I was wondering if I could just get both of you, get each of you to tell the committee, in your opinion, what the greatest threats are to our national security in connection with this. That is, the greatest threats that exist as a result of an unsecure southern border, and how significant these threats are if we're not able to achieve a greater degree of control over who and what might be crossing our southern border.
Well, sir, I would start with, I mean, there's many different threats against our country, and oftentimes we focus, certainly I'm lectured repeatedly on the threats that I concern myself most with are not kind of military threats. They're maybe law enforcement threats, they're immigration threats, but, you know, I am a problem solver, and I am tasked to try to protect the southern approaches of the United States. So I don't just focus on military threats, because frankly, from my part of the world, there's very few military threats. But, you know, there's 40,000 Americans that die every year from the drugs that move up through my part of the world into bills and then into our homeland. 40,000 people a year. You know, since 9/11, there's 500,000 people have died from narco-terrorism, as we call it in down where I live. Narco-terrorism. 500,000 Americans have died. Very few have died from, you know, traditional terrorism, if you will, since 9/11. It costs our country $200 billion a year to deal with the people that are into drugs but are not, you know, dying. So I see that as a huge, huge, huge threat, and I won't just limit myself to worrying about traditional military threats, because, as Bill says, it's a team sport, and all of the law enforcement, the CIA, the DIA, everyone's doing their part. But at the end of the day, I'm not going to concern myself with, look, General Kelly, it's not a military threat, so don't worry about it. Right. That's why, I mean, 95% of my activities in the course of my time, all of my time, 95% I focus on non-military things: economics, human rights, developing relationships with presidents and ministers of defense, and police chiefs in all of these countries, particularly the Central American countries, so I can move them in the direction of solving their problems, which will ultimately solve our problems.
Right. Admiral?
To add on exactly what John said, you know, these businesses that are moving product have outstripped the capacity of the nations to our from our southern border, their capacity to be able to handle these challenges. And that's why it requires the team effort from all of our elements of government to assist them to build their capacities, whether it's in a mill-to-mill capacity, which is what my responsibility is, whether it's a law enforcement, whether it's capacity building in governance, in the judicial system. That's what has to occur. It just can't be focused exclusively on the military. It takes everything to deal with the challenges that these countries are being faced with.
All right, thank you. General Kelly, can you discuss the level and the recent trends in activity of Islamic terrorist organizations within the SOUTHCOM area of responsibility?
I'm comfortable to say, Senator, that the Islamic extremist, organizations are not very well entrenched in my part of the world. I don't see any direct terrorist threat right now, and the people that will look the hardest at this are CIA and FBI. So I'm comfortable, but there is a fair amount of activity by both Iran and recruiting, or at least attempts to recruit, by other Islamic extremist organizations. We expect, we calculate right now somewhere less than 100, but close to 100 young people that have left the Caribbean region in particular, now have gone to Syria to fight for the Islamic extremist organizations. And of course, these small countries that don't have anything approaching our FBI or any of the law enforcement, they're extremely concerned about them coming back, as we are to our own country, and Western Europe has the same concerns. The difference is these small countries that I'm describing have no real ability to deal with them. And of course, if they come back, or when they come back, they conduct operations in their own country, or they can simply get on the network, right up into our country, and do whatever someone tells them to do.
Because they're right at our back door. Thank you. Thank you both. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Just to be clear about your answers to Senator Lee, is the southern border secure or not secure?
The southern border can be more secure, as can the Mexican border be more secure.
That's the only question I had. General?
Sir, I think with the amount of drugs and people that move across our southwest border, it doesn't seem all that secure to me.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Admiral Gortney, I want to thank you. In fact, I want to thank you both for your emphasis on the importance of the effect of sequestration on your commands and on your ability to carry out your responsibilities. As I talk to people at home, often I run into people who say, well, sequestration is not such a big deal. It's only 2% of the federal budget. what people don't realize is 2/3 of the federal budget isn't subject to sequestration. So what it really amounts to in your case is about a 10% cut, which is very significant. 2% of 1/3, you end up with about a 10% cut, and that's what you're facing. The other thing that I think we have to realize around here, everybody's worried about sequestration. In talking to my colleagues, the solutions are not easy. And we have to keep in front of us the danger of sequestration when we're talking about the solutions. Finding other alternatives to replace it there's no low-hanging fruit here. It's going to be difficult, but I'm very happy to have your testimony this morning, which underlines for this committee and for the country how serious a threat this is to our national security. Admiral Gortney, with regard to your responsibilities in the Arctic, would it be in the national interest for this country to accede to the Law of the Sea Treaty?
Yes, sir. The Department of Defense, the Chief of Naval Operations, and myself were all in agreement that we should accede, especially as we take on the role as a lead for the Arctic Council. It would give us a better strength, a better position of strength as we negotiate through there.
And as I understand it, it's actually compromised. Our failure to be a member of that treaty is actually compromising our ability, for example, to stake claims to where the continental shelf is and those kinds of things.
That's one of the reasons why we feel it would be a good idea to accede.
General Kelly, you agree with that?
Don't have a lot of experience in my part of the world with the treaty and the issues related to the treaty, but certainly, in my broader opinion, I agree with Bill exactly. Yes, sir.
Thank you. General Kelly, you talked, it was kind of amazing. Well, first, let me say, I really appreciate your comments about the CIA. Because as I travel and as a member of the Intelligence Committee, I generally meet with CIA personnel around the world, and I have found them to be uniformly patriotic, intelligent, passionate about their work on behalf of this country. And as you mentioned, they live in a dangerous world. There are places in the world where if they could, it's a danger to go outside and have lunch downtown. And I think it's very important to recognize these people that don't get recognition generally, and I really appreciate the statement that you made. You talked about Colombia as a model partner, and I had to think, 15, 20 years ago, we wouldn't have been saying that. And we're dealing with so many unstable regimes around the world. How do we replicate what happened in Colombia? What are the steps that they took in order to take their country back, if you will, from the chaos that they were in 20 years ago?
Well, sir, when you're looking over the abyss, and it's a long way down, you have kind of a come to God point, I think, and you have to make some decisions, and they made those decisions, and really Plan Colombia, such as it was, very, very successful, really started on this side of the hill, I think. And but certainly it started in the Congress, and there's a real misconception about what in some places about what Plan Colombia was. We gave our money was 4 cents on the dollar as to what the Colombians contributed. So we didn't bankroll it. A lot of people think. I have people tell me that we shouldn't put boots on the ground like we did in Colombia. We didn't put boots on the ground. They did all their own fighting. They did their own dying. And while they were committed or making these commitments, they made social changes. Their elites were taxed and had to make a commitment to Plan Colombia. It is a remarkable reorientation of their society that they had to conduct. And frankly, the good news story there is that what we're doing in Central America now, because they face similar problems. They're in the abyss. They're about to be failed states. So the Colombians, I just was down in Colombia, met with the President and the Minister of Defense, and we talked about this at length. But I've brought the Colombians up to have seminars to Miami and invited all of the senior-most officials of the 3 countries that I'm particularly concerned with, Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras, in a day-long seminar as to this is where my country, Colombia, was 20 years ago. This is how close we were to being a failed narco state. These are the decisions we had to make, and oh, by the way, they're exactly the decisions you have to make. You have to redo your tax code. You have to get your own wealthy people investing, instead of investing in Miami and in high-end South Beach real estate, to invest in your own country, these kind of things. We've done that twice now, focusing the second time on economics, and I'm going to do another one with all 3 presidents and their teams coming up in Miami to do a higher-level economic development conference. As I say, 95% of my efforts are not military. It's economic development.
And as you testified earlier, that's the key to stopping the flow of illegal immigrants into this country, is to make their countries more attractive places to live. And in fact, that's happened with Mexico, hasn't it? Don't we? Isn't it a net zero immigration from Mexico at this point?
As I understand it, it is net zero, and it is because of the economy in Mexico.
Thank you, General. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Admiral, General. It was a pleasure to meet with you the other day, General. I thank you for your time and attention, and thank both of you for your testimony today. Of course, I've shared with many folks that I am a very proud member of the Iowa Army National Guard, and our members have been very involved in a number of SOUTHCOM's missions, whether it's counter-drug security missions. I had an MP detachment that served in Honduras as part of their security mission. But we also have National Guard members from all over the United States that serve in Guantanamo Bay at the detainee center. And unfortunately, a lot of folks will want to politicize Guantanamo Bay, or as we call it, Gitmo. But I'm very proud of the service that is given there, and I believe it is a very important mission. I believe that this is vital to our national interest to keep these terrorists at Guantanamo Bay. So, General Kelly, if you could describe the treatment that our citizen soldiers or those that work at the detainment center receive from the inmates, and if you could also describe, just in your own words or your personal thoughts based on your experiences, whether you think that these terrorists that are housed there, do you think that they would return to the fight if they were released?
Well, maybe, thanks for the question, Senator. I think I'll take the first part, the second part first, and just simply say there's, and again, I don't track these kind of things. I'm not responsible to track these kind of things, but I think the best estimate on about how many of them return to the fight is about 30%. So that's a fair number. We know for sure something in the neighborhood about 18% have, with the kind of intelligence people, CIA and others, their estimate is about 30%. So they do return to the fight. Less so recently, but of course the more recent detainees that have been released, they've got plenty, they've got plenty of time to get back in the fight if they want to. But for right now, in the most recent detainee transfers or releases, we don't see any of them going back. But again, they've just been released. As far as the treatment goes, first, as the chairman said at the beginning, the troops down there that do the detention, that carry out the mission, I mean, we do exactly what the President of the United States tasked us to do. And it goes from the President to SecDef to me to Gitmo. And you'll see it when you go down there on Friday. The detainees are treated very, very, very well. Their medical care is excellent. They're treated humanely, with dignity, all of that. Now, if they cross the line, they're treated firmly with minimum use of force. And there's a percentage of them down there that that are pretty abusive to my guys and gals down there. I won't go into what splashing is, but it's pretty vile stuff. They'll tell you all about it. Physical assaults. But at the end of the day, we're the good guys. They're not. We carry out the mission that the President gives us, and all of the human rights groups that go down there give us very, very high marks on how that's done. And again, we can talk the policy, which I'm not into, but at the end of the day, it's a very, very important mission to this country, and it's done superbly well by the men and women that are down there.
Thank you very much, General. We also did discuss the state partnership program the other day during our discussion, and I do feel that this is a very important program for many of our National Guards. Currently, we are involved in a state partnership program with Kosovo. I know other states are involved with a number of countries. If you would please, in your own words, just describe how important you believe this program to be.
Yeah, the partnership program is very, very high impact and very, very low cost. And what I have seen over my years in working with other countries, whether in the part of the world I'm in now or in the Central Command area, you know, among the Arab countries, it's our example that catches their attention. The fact that men and women are come down from Iowa or wherever and work together. You know, the role or the status of women in many of these countries is very low. Yet they see American units come down, and men and women working together. In many cases, women actually in command of the unit, the small unit that comes down. That's startling to them, and I think over time that is what changes these countries for the better. How just working alongside American servicemen and women, and really just as importantly, Homeland Security men and women that are sprinkled around the world, FBI, DEA. Our good example is what changes these countries over time. Where we touch, they notice, they take notice, and then they change. We have very positive effect on these societies.
I appreciate that so much, and I do want to take the time to thank all of the staff members that join us here today for the testimony. Lots of great service members come out of Iowa, so thank you, Sergeant Major, very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to you both. I want to offer a thank you and then two questions. So on the thank you side, you each helped prepare Senator Cornyn and I for our recent visit to Mexico, Honduras, and Colombia, and it was a very successful visit. We saw evidence of what you had said, Admiral Gortney, the increasing mill-to-mill cooperation between the United States and Mexico that's very laudable. We went to Honduras, General Kelly, at your request, to meet with President Hernandez. Our ambassador, when we landed, first took us to a neighborhood that he said, I'm now going to take you to the most dangerous neighborhood in the most dangerous city in the most dangerous country in the world, the Chamelecon neighborhood in San Pedro Sula. But we saw USAID projects in that very dangerous neighborhood that are helping folks. Visited some of your folks at JTF Bravo at Sotacano, and then had a chance to talk to the President about the proposed budgetary investment in the region. And then finally in Colombia, we went out to Tolemaida and saw the U.S. and Colombian military together talk about the progress that they've made in helping turn the failed state into a reliable ally of the United States, and it was remarkable. I saw all the challenges that you've testified to and that my colleagues have asked you about, and I think you've done a good job at responding to those. And I came back mindful of challenges, but I also came back thinking of some upside opportunities if we get it right, And I want to ask you about that. Senator McCain, in his opening comments, kind of talked about we don't necessarily pay that much attention to the region as we do other places, and more sustained effort could be helpful. What I came away from our trip thinking is of the deep cultural connections that we have in this 36 nations in the Americas, from Canada to Patagonia. We're all this mixture of an indigenous culture that has welcomed European, African, and Asian immigration, and that mix is a common feature, north to south. We all call ourselves Americans, north, central, or south. We are all Americans. There is a growing middle class in these nations, and growing economic prospects, and growing trade. The most significant number of free trade agreements that the United States has is with nations in the Americas. There's the prospect for no war in the Americas, maybe for the first time in history, and certainly in a very different way than any other continent. The peace negotiation between the Colombian government and the FARC, if it reaches a successful point in this sort of final chapter, could make us two continents with millions of challenges, but two continents without a war, when you can't say the same thing about Europe, you can't say the same thing about Africa, you can't say the same thing about Asia. And so I really see some opportunities for an America as 1 billion people strong, with cultural ties, with trade ties, with better and better military ties, even in the midst of all these challenges, which are real. And I just wanted to ask you, do you have that same sense of there are really upside opportunities in both of your areas of responsibility if we pay persistent attention rather than episodic attention, sort of across all of government?
Couldn't agree more, Senator. The one thing, my takeaway in the part of the world I work in, with very few exceptions, the people that didn't get the memo about, human rights and things like that. Venezuela is an example. The vast majority of the continent, all the way down to Patagonia, as you say, they want to be best friends with the United States. They want to partner with us economically, socially. I mean, they and they're disappointed that we pay so little attention to them. You know, there's some competitors. You know, the Chinese are very heavily involved in terms of economics and things like that. The Russians, in much less, but they're, you know, competitors in a way. But the frustration that the countries have is they would rather deal with us on the very issues they deal with China and Russia on. But we sometimes just show a lack of interest. But they want to partner with us, and they love the fact the United States no longer comes down carrying a big stick, but rather equal partners. And an awful lot of that good feeling comes as a direct result, I think, of the men and women of the command that I command and how much time and effort they put in partnering across the region.
Admiral Gortney.
I'll echo what John said. You know, our partners know that we are a really great nation, and we're with them for the long haul. We may have some ups and downs, like most relationships, but we'll be there, we're stable, and we'll be there with them for the long haul. So a little bit more investment of our time and energy from all the elements of our government will go a long way, because they need our help. They have some immense challenges out there.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, gentlemen, for your service and for being here today. Admiral, in your prepared testimony, you discussed the growing threat that's posed by cruise missiles to the United States, and you say that Russia is progressing towards its goal of deploying long-range conventionally armed cruise missiles, and if that trend continues, that over time NORAD is going to face increased risks in its ability to defend North America. Does the budget support your plans for the cruise missile defense that we need for this country?
Provided we're given the account that the Department has asked for, I think we'll be on a good path. When it comes to the particular cruise missile threat, you know, we're experimenting with JLINs up at Aberdeen. That shows great promise. It's not without challenges. Any test program is going to have it. There's a lot of air traffic up there. And to be able to integrate that into the rest of our architecture, to include our Aegis ships that will be off of our coast, so that we can deal with the leakers. You know, I've been in the cruise missile threat since I was a Lieutenant JG, and I've shot over 1,300 of them. So I know how effective they are, and I know how hard they are to defeat. And it really requires us to have a layered approach. It's more effective. It's only effective if we get the Archer and not just deal with the arrows, and have the ability to reach deep to get the cruise missile shooter, so that we're only dealing with a few of the leakers out here. The long-range aviation, Russian long-range aviation, it's a pretty significant increase in numbers. And what concerns me more are two things. It's the where they're flying, even through down the English Channel. It's where they're flying that has not been what they've done in the past, even back with the Soviet Union, and the development of the cruise missiles that they have that have a very long range. That from eastern Russia, they can range critical infrastructure in Alaska and in Canada that we rely on for a homeland defense mission. So we have to look at this in a more expansive manner. But if we have the investments that we've asked for, we'll be able to outpace that technology.
So also in this year's budget, when we look at those investments in the next generation defense technology, which I support, I think it's needed, and I support it strongly. I am concerned, though, that those capabilities are not going to be deployed anytime soon. I believe it will be in the next decade at the earliest. Do you have concerns with that as well? Are you satisfied with that timeline, or are you just, I guess, accepting of that timeline?
Well, as a military officer, we'll take capability earlier than later any day. And but for the necessary investments as the technology is advancing, I'm satisfied with where we are.
Okay, good to hear. With your cyberspace mission, you state that it would be rather simplistic to assume that a large-scale cyber attack on the nation's infrastructure would somehow not impact both us and our partners' ability to successfully perform the DSCA mission, the support that we give to our civil authorities. And it makes strategic sense to consider the steps that could be taken to mitigate or prevent those types of attacks. Can you elaborate a little bit on that statement that you made?
Yes, ma'am. My assigned responsibility is to defend my own networks and to help the lead federal agency in the defense support for civil authorities. But effectively, it can be a mission kill. We are very reliant on critical infrastructure held by the private and public, but critical infrastructure in order for us to defend the nation. A cyber attack in Ottawa would take out the northeast quadrant of our air defense sector. It would be effectively a mission kill. So not only would it affect me able to do my mission, quite frankly, more importantly, we as a nation rely on this same infrastructure for us to operate, whether it's banking, rail, aviation, power, movement of water. All of these things have critical infrastructure that we must have, and they need to be hardened against an adversary.
Can you give us specifically some of the steps that you would recommend we take so that we can look towards that prevention when it comes to our cyber?
Ma'am, this is out of my league. The technical aspects, I'm going to defer to my good friend Mike Rogers at DISA. He really understands it. I don't know a switch from a router. But the real issue comes down is from you all. It requires law and policy that are very difficult for us to come across as a nation. It's privacy, some privacy concerns, some things that you might even say cross the Bill of Rights, many of the same issues that we had before 9/11. And as a result of 9/11, we passed new laws and got new policy that gave us the ability to better protect our nation. And I would hope that it wouldn't take a cyber 9/11 or a cyber Pearl Harbor for us to finally realize we need to do that sort of thing. And you all have taken great strides, and we're grateful for that, and we need to continue that momentum.
And do you think that it is imperative that the government be able to share some information with private businesses, and private businesses also share that information with each other so that we can look more towards defense, deterrence, and, if necessary, offensive use of our capabilities?
Yes, ma'am. And I'm really focused on the defense. You don't transmit until you're ready to receive, and we need to shore up that defense.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you both for your testimony here today and your service. I want to continue Senator Fisher's questions about cybersecurity. Cyber attacks against the homeland are growing as a threat to U.S. infrastructure, business, and defense. A critical mission of NORTHCOM is to coordinate the response to attacks on the homeland with the Department of Homeland Security. Admiral Rogers told our colleagues on the House side that the Obama administration isn't where it needs to be yet in planning the coordination between the military and civilian agencies' response to a major cyber attack. How would you assess the coordination between NORTHCOM and DHS?
We're supporting the DHS in that regard, predominantly in the aftermath of the event and my defense support for civil authorities. The difficulty that they have are exactly what we were just discussing. It goes to the laws that we need as a nation so that then DHS has the authorities they need to be able to better defend our nation in that regard.
From your perspective, how is the overall coordination between federal, state, and local governments, and how, beyond what you've suggested, do you think we could improve?
Federal locals, we just a couple of weeks ago, we met with the Council of Governors within DOD, and I'm a member of that particular board in my capacity as Northern Command. And we have a long way to go to sharing information. We're doing a pretty good job sharing gov to gov, from local, state to Homeland Security. The challenges we're working our way through. Homeland Security is working their way through sharing private to Homeland Security, but there are even some reasons why private can't talk to the state and local. And so it's expanding those authorities that are required to better communicate, to better defend.
I'd now like to turn to your Arctic mission. Obviously, NORTHCOM plays an integral role in the Arctic. How important are international cooperative agreements and partnerships such as Tri-Command Framework for Arctic Cooperation for U.S. NORTHCOM success in the Arctic?
Absolutely critical. You know, it's a very, very difficult place to navigate, communicate, and sustain ourselves. And so those partnerships that we can share capability and capacity, as we do with Canada through the NORAD role, cannot be overstated.
New York's 109th Airlift Wing is home to the only LC-130 ski birds in the U.S. Air Force. Their unique ability to provide airlift on snow and ice has made them a valuable resource for the National Science Foundation, supporting science missions in Greenland and Antarctica. Last year, the unit showed the full range of their capabilities by successfully supporting exercises with Canadian military in the Arctic. Based on the current types of threats you see in the Arctic, how important is this type of airlift capability to the future success of NORTHCOM?
Absolutely critical. Once again, it goes to how are we going to navigate, communicate, sustain ourselves, and the C-130s with skid, our helicopters with skids from our other Guard outfits that help us out up there. Absolutely critical.
I've read a lot of recent articles about some sort of rush to use the Arctic for natural resources, for other leverage. Do you think we need more of this particular capability or other capabilities in the future as our Arctic presence increases?
I do, and that's why, as I'm working on our Arctic way ahead as the advocate for the Arctic, we'll be addressing those issues, and I'll have that out in the spring.
Thank you. My last question for General Kelly is specifically, what is your assessment with regard to Iran's role in the SOUTHCOM area of operation?
Senator, the Iranians have, over the last decade or so, been increasing the number of embassies, as an example, in the region. I think they've tripled the number of embassies. They've opened what they call cultural centers to, try to garner support in terms of their country, and certainly to try to circumvent the sanctions, I think. But the point is, they've opened up these cultural centers, and frankly, I don't see a lot of similarity between the Latin culture and the Iranian culture, for sure. I'm a little bit suspicious of this activity, just because there is such a vast difference between the two countries, or the two regions, two cultures. So we keep a watchful eye on them. There's a fair amount of concern about local Jewish communities in Latin America, of which there are many, actually. I'm sure the senator knows about the issue in the 90s, in fact, 85 deaths that took place in the Jewish community center there in Buenos Aires. So we keep a close eye on that. They're generally a country that, whatever they're up to, they're up to no good, and we have to watch them closely.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, gentlemen, for your service and for your time here today. I have to say, General Kelly, I agree with your statement that there doesn't seem to be all that many similarities between Latin American culture and Persian culture. I would also like to point out that Iran has been implicated in the murders of many Jews in South Africa and Argentina, the investigator of which mysteriously turned up dead a few weeks ago. And Admiral Gortney, I'd just like to highlight in your testimony on page 6 that you say Iran recently launched another satellite into orbit, and, quote, despite international condemnation and sanctions, Iran has failed to cooperate fully with the International Atomic Energy Agency to resolve all outstanding concerns regarding its nuclear program, particularly those concerning its possible military dimensions, end quote. So before we even reach any further deal with Iran, Iran is already not living up to its obligations under multiple UN Security Council resolutions. But now I'd like to turn to Russia. General Kelly, on page 8 of your written testimony, you say, quote, under President Putin, we have seen a clear return to Cold War tactics, end quote. Could you please elaborate on what you mean specifically in your AOR?
Well, yes, Senator. For a number of years, we saw almost no real activity of any kind from the Russians, and just in the last couple of years, there's been some long-range bomber missions. They deployed a small task force of warships to the Caribbean, made various stops in countries like Cuba, Venezuela, and Nicaragua. They're, from my perspective, really a nuisance, but they seem to be ratcheting up their kind of in-your-face we can go anywhere we want and we have friends around the globe. We know that they're in discussions, not to open bases, but to have agreements to where they can either bring ships to refuel and or aircraft to land and refuel. So, but as I say, they're more of a nuisance, but they're really up to I think just kind of making their point that they can go anywhere they want and challenge us in various ways. There's also a pretty steady stream of electronic warfare collection vessels that ply the waters of the Caribbean and the our Atlantic coast, and periodically, we'll stop and get fuel, as I say, or pull liberty in some of the countries that they're friendliest with.
Admiral Gortney, would you share your perspective on growing Russian influence and activity in your AOR?
Absolutely, sir. Qualitatively, the Russians have developed a better military than the quantitative military of the Soviet Union, and they've also developed a new doctrine, and we're seeing that military and that doctrine playing out in the Ukraine. In the homelands, we're seeing them use that better military with long-range aviation and the deployment of their submarines and of the collection vessels that John was talking about. So what bothers me is the intent. What is their intent? They're clearly messaging us. That's we do that as well. But what is the intent as they employ that doctrine through the spectrum of conflict? That's what concerns me.
And now this is a question for both of you. If the United States proceeds with the sequestration cuts to our defense budget, would you expect to see Russian influence and activity in the Western Hemisphere continue to grow or decrease?
I think any opponent will seize an opportunity when they see it, and I think that that's exactly what would happen.
I agree, sir. And the sequestration thing, again, it is what our partners around the world are looking at is this kind of almost withdrawal of our leadership role, depending on what part of the world and who you're talking to, but to take away the ability to partner with nations, to do deployments, would really, I think, send a shockwave through many of the countries that we're most aligned with and allied with. I know in my part of the world, they're already very concerned at the limited amount of engagement that already takes place.
So let me get this straight. 25 years after the collapse of the Soviet Union, 50 years after the Cuban Missile Crisis, 200 years after the Monroe Doctrine, your opinion is that if this Congress proceeds with the sequestration cuts to our defense, we will see continued and growing Russian adventurism in the Western Hemisphere. Admiral Gortney, yes or no?
I would agree with that.
General Kelly?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Senator Shaheen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you both for being here and for your service to the country. I apologize for missing your remarks. Unfortunately, there are too many things going on at one time, which I know you appreciate. General Kelly, last year during the crisis on the southern border with unaccompanied minors, you gave a briefing to a number of senators, and one of the things you talked about is the impact of cutbacks on your ability to address drug interdiction and interdiction of illegals coming across the border. Can you talk a little bit about that here and what the impact of these budget cuts have had on your ability to address those issues?
Yes, Senator. As far as the interdiction of drugs go, and we've talked about it a little bit here in the hearing previously, it's all, in my world, it's all about having an ability to see them, detection and monitoring. That's really my mission. And then I work closely with law enforcement, particularly Coast Guard, to do the final interdiction phase. The interdiction phase really takes ships or cutters that you can fly or some vessel that you can fly a helicopter from. Last year, we interdicted 158, collectively, we interdicted 158 metric tons of cocaine with no violence. Once it gets ashore, and that's the key, once it gets ashore in Central America, moves up through Mexico, we're taking almost nothing off the market, and the violence is unbelievable. More ships, more cutters means more cocaine. You're never going to get to the point of going, stopping it all, and that includes heroin and methamphetamine. Again, all that comes up through the network that runs through my zone and into Bill's. You're never going to stop at all, but the key, what you're trying to do is drive down availability and drive up price. And then less people won't start toying around with drugs and get hooked on drugs and all that kind of thing. And you weren't here, but 40,000 Americans a year die from drugs. It costs our country $200 billion a year, and then all the human misery that goes with that. So that's kind of the more vessels that I can fly helicopters from. Another option, and something I'm doing more and more of, is working with the partner militaries, particularly in Central America, moving their militaries away from the internal parts of their country to recommending that they move to the borders, and then work together with their neighbors north, south, to include Mexico, and to try to, this year, in fact, the Hondurans, for the first time, I think, in history, interdicted multiple tons of cocaine, a lot of it because of how we recommended they go about their business. So the partners have ponied up to this in a big way, because they see it as, much of it is because their countries are in the conditions they're in because of the drug trafficking.
And how important is it to those countries in Central America to be able to see us as a strong partner in those efforts? And what will be the impact of further cuts on our ability to do that?
Well, they see us, as I mentioned just a few minutes ago, they want to be partnered with us. They want to trade with us. They want to interact with us. They want our help, our investment, a better way to put it. And if we walk away, frankly, if we reduce any more of what I'm doing in Latin America, it'll go to zero. I mean, we're doing so little now, and we could do so much more with just a little bit more.
Well, we certainly appreciate that in New Hampshire and northern New England, where we've seen a real epidemic of heroin and drug abuse and deaths from heroin overdoses. So we very much appreciate that. Can I also ask, and again, you may have covered this, but are you seeing terrorists from other parts of the world exploiting the smuggling routes that are used by organized crime?
That's actually a great question, Senator. We are beginning to see a real convergence of the two. We know, the biggest problem these traffickers have is not getting drugs and things into the United States. The biggest problem they have is laundering the $85 billion of illicitly gained funds. And we know, to one degree or another, that there are Lebanese Hezbollah associates that are helping launder some of that money. And we don't know exactly how much they're taking as a fee, but we know it's an awful lot, tens of millions of dollars for sure.
And do we know what banks they're using to launder? Is it Lebanese banks?
Their connections with the Lebanese banks back in Lebanon. And beyond that, I'm over my head. We'd have to get Treasury in here to talk about it. But they're very aggressive, our Treasury Department, very aggressive, and increasingly so going after this issue. Yes, ma'am.
My time is up, but thank you. Thank you both.
I want to thank the chairman. I want to thank both of you for your leadership and what you do for our country. I wanted to ask you, General Kelly, I note in your prepared statement the superb work done by our guards and medical force at Guantanamo. And I wanted to follow up and ask you about an article I had read in the New York Times about a court order that was not allowing certain female guards to do all the same functions as men at Guantanamo, which obviously, to me, strikes me as somewhat unusual because I don't think we would find that in other prison-type settings. So could you tell me a little bit about that and what's happening, and if there's a specific group of detainees that has generated this court order, who are they, and why are they there?
Yes, Senator. This issue on the women, and you're exactly right. I have court orders against using women because they are women with certain detainees, the high-value detainees. But this is really just a series of, they manipulate us. They're experts at manipulating us, them and their proponents. This is just a series. 2 years ago it was Quran desecration, which we don't do, and they had motions in the courts, and we got past that. Then it was how we search them, that we were searching their genitals, which we don't search that way. And right, the temperature in the cells, the noise in the cells. And this is just one of a series. I mean, frankly, we're dealing with women now. We had 2 orders from 2 different judges in the commission side to not use women because they were women, because the high-value detainees felt it was against their religion, which anyone that knows anything about the Muslim religion knows that it's not against their religion. But the point is, we had women restricted from doing the jobs they're trained to do.
And who, give us a sense of who some of these high-level detainees who brought this action to prevent women guards, who, by the way, we're very proud of, are doing great work at Guantanamo.
Certainly the 9/11-5.
So the 9/11-5 want to tell us that the women who serve our country can't guard them.
That's exactly right. And then the coal bomber.
And the coal bomber.
The coal bomber. And the expectation is, once we get through this, we had two judges, 2 court orders. One has been lifted. The other one is still under consideration. And as soon as this is over, it'll be, we don't want to be touched by Jews, or we don't want to be touched by, black soldiers, or we don't want to be touched by Roman Catholics. It's just a series. It's beyond me why we even consider some of these requests. But I'm not a lawyer. I'm not smart enough to figure this out.
Well, it's beyond me, too, because I think they'll find that in the United States of America, we believe very firmly in equality for women. And so, to me, this is just absurd that we're even entertaining these challenges. But I want to commend the women guards at Guantanamo, and I know that you're every bit as good. And, when the 9/11 attackers don't want women guarding them, it's absurd, and I don't think we should be accommodating that. So please say thank you for me, and that we support them fully.
Sure will.
I also wanted to follow up on the recent transfers from Guantanamo to Uruguay, and just ask you, I understand there were a number of transfers made there in December, and can you tell me whether you have any concerns about the resettlement of these detainees in Uruguay? And I did see public reports that one of them actually left Uruguay already and went to Argentina, and can you help me understand how we're keeping tabs on these folks?
I can tell you that, first, I'm not in any way involved with the decision to transfer them. That's all done by an interagency group. And I'm not privy at all to the agreements that may or may not be made with countries that receive these guys. Sometimes the Algerians, as an example, the Saudis, very specifically, when they take control of these guys, they put them in a setting that is very, very restrictive. It's my understanding, probably from reading the same open press reports, that and particularly the Uruguayan president, who said once they arrive that they are free men and there are very few restrictions on them. There's another concern I have that I cannot talk in an open setting like this about some of their activities, the Uruguayans in particular. But generally speaking, if you believe the newspaper reports, some of them want to come back to Guantanamo. Because they're not living the lifestyle they thought they would lead in Uruguay. There's kind of an interesting twist. But again, I'm concerned somewhat about their activities, but it's really not part of my responsibility to track them at all.
Well, I would like to follow up, certainly offline, about some of the concerns that you may have about Uruguay so that we can understand that. And I just want to thank both of you for your tremendous service to the country.
Senator King has an additional comment.
Just a quick question for General Kelly. You've talked several times about the sophistication of this network that's moving principally drugs in and out of the country. Do you have any specificity on where they penetrate the border? Is it in a particular area? Is it by land, sea? How do they make it through? I guess, Admiral, your jurisdiction, but either of you, I'm interested in more specificity about where they come through.
I'll push it to the Admiral, but the answer is every way you could imagine.
Could I interrupt? Isn't the answer also it's like squeezing a balloon? And right now, the Arizona-Mexico border is one of the major transshipment points. One reason is because we have mountains that they come right up and actually station guides on the mountains to lead them forward. I didn't mean to interrupt, but right now the Tucson sector of the Arizona-Mexico border is one of the most heavily trafficked, I'm sorry to say. But please respond, both of you.
Chairman, that's exactly right. Part of the challenge of John and his predecessors' success in the maritime pushed it up through the peninsula. And so wherever we squeeze, we got to squeeze equally on the balloon. The efforts in the maritime right now is pushing it up outside through the Bahamas and to the east of the Bahamas. So wherever we apply pressure, we will be effective for a period of time, and they're going to find the weakness. It's like water. And so it's understanding and have the intelligence as to where to apply the pressure and where will they go next, which is the real challenge.
But isn't it true that right now the Arizona-Mexico border is one of the major trafficking points? Is that correct?
That is correct, sir.
Thank you.
But again, I'm just trying to understand this. As you seal up one place, you're going to find other, some of the routes seem to be by water?
Yes, sir.
The example I would give you, 2.5 years ago when I first took this job, we had the vast majority of cocaine moving up Central America, Mexico, into the United States. 2 or 3% moving up the islands into, say, Dominican Republic and over to Puerto Rico. Now we see we've had a lot of success on the isthmus, and we've put a kind of a shield in place. So we've deflected a lot of the cocaine. Now it's moving maybe 14, 15% is moving up in a way that had not been used since the 1980s. In my JADF South, Joint Interagency Task Force South down in Key West, we've just stood up a container cell because we know they're starting to move things now increasingly by container. And we just got, I think, just the other day, 156 kilos in a container. As we've done things with aviation.
The container which came by sea.
By sea, yes, sir. Heroin, we know, because it's very, very high value, travels primarily by air. That is a passenger with a couple of 3 kilos in his bag. We see the aviation flights that used to come out of Venezuela, exclusively out of Venezuela, going into Honduras because of things we've done with the Hondurans and the recommendations we made to the Hondurans and the Guatemalans. We're now seeing the jets or the aircraft. They've transitioned from, say, propeller aircraft to jets, and now they're going deeper to Mexico. They change very quickly.
It would be helpful to us in terms of allocating resources to protect against this, to have some analysis, and perhaps you could get together with the DEA, the FBI, CIA, other Homeland Security, about where not necessarily where, but the types of routes, sea, air, land, just so we know where we should be putting our resources.
We certainly have that, Senator. I mean, I could sit here for 3 hours and tell you, but the bottom line is, my organization can see electronically as well as through intel, working with DEA and FBI, we can detect and monitor this stuff to a very, very high rate of accuracy. What I can't do, what the interagency can't do very effectively, because we don't have ships and cutters, is interdict it.
And that's a question of resources, getting back to the sequester. For the record, if you would supply a one-pager on where you see the paths, that would be helpful.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Could I also mention, while we're in this conversation, that because of the legalization of marijuana in Colorado and other places, that we're seeing a reduction in marijuana shipments and an increase in methamphetamines, heroin, and other so-called hard drugs. You want to comment on that phenomena?
Yes, sir. It's one of the common questions that come up in my partnership with the Bahamas and Mexico is the legalization of marijuana. It concerns them. It concerns us. It especially.
Yeah, but hasn't it affected the kinds of drugs that are being sent up? Less marijuana.
The drug traffic has evolved. I'm not aware if it's a direct result yet of less of a demand for marijuana that is legally grown and sold here in the States. I can't help but think that in the future that is exactly what's going to happen.
Thank you. General.
Yes, sir. The heroin issue is remarkable, and the methamphetamine, as you point out. You know, methamphetamine used to be produced in the United States, but because of different laws that the Congress changed, it's harder and harder for the local labs to get the precursors to make the methamphetamine. So now I think something in the neighborhood of 90% of all the methamphetamine now consumed in the United States is produced in Mexico and then smuggled in. As far as the heroin goes, illegal pharmaceuticals, you know, OxyContin, that kind of thing, is very, very expensive. I'm told that if you went out here and bought a single OxyContin pill illegally on Capitol Hill, it costs you about $60 and gets you a certain place. That same amount of heroin is about $6. So we see, as the federal government has really gotten its arms around illegal pharmaceuticals and the availability of illegal pharmaceuticals have come down, now the heroin has just exploded. And it's not just in, as I think I testified last year, it's just not in inner city communities now. It's everywhere. I mean, it's in New Hampshire, it's in, you know, Capitol Hill, it's in Beacon Hill, it's on the Harvard campus, you know, and it's really very, very, very disturbing.
Senator Ayotte had an additional question.
Thank you, Chairman. Let me just say that, you know, this issue of heroin, it's devastating in a state like mine. We've seen almost a 60% increase in drug deaths because, you know, the inexpensive nature of heroin and the addictive nature of it. So thank you for everything you're doing on that. And I think that's an area where we should work together in this committee to get more resources for you the more we can drive up the price of heroin, obviously, and interdict more of it, the more we can try to combat this along other ways, too. So thank you. I had a follow-up question, though, about Guantanamo. And, you know, there's been a lot of talk about Guantanamo being used by our enemies as a recruitment tool. And has anyone ever looked at the issue of if we move these terrorists, we move some of these high-level detainees to a facility in the United States, does anyone know whether have we looked at the idea of whether that facility would also be used as an example of a recruitment tool? Seems to me that our enemies, almost anything that becomes symbolic of the United States of America and our fight against them can be used as a radicalization and recruitment tool. Have you looked at this issue or have any thoughts on that?
I have a lot of thoughts on it, Senator.
Well, what are your thoughts?
I don't believe, well, my belief is the people that these Islamic terrorists are focused on doing us so much harm, not because of Gitmo or wherever we house these guys. It's really about us as a people, as a country.
And what we stand for.
And what we stand for, the way we live our lives, the way we worship any God we want to worship, the way we educate and our little girls. That's why they hate us. They don't need Gitmo to hate us. And if we move them to Charleston, then it would be Charleston would be it's because of who we are and who they are as to why they hate us so much.
Thank you, General.
Senator Tillis.
Thank you. Thank you both for your extraordinary leadership and service. I want to go back to expand on something that Senator Donnelly asked, and this has to do, General Kelly, you and I met earlier this week, and we were talking about the level of situational awareness you have. You know where a lot of these bad people are. You may even know their phone number. You know where they're moving and when they're moving. So there's got to be a high degree of frustration that you could do so much more if you had the resources available. Can you kind of replay what we talked about in terms of just how much you know about what's going on down there that you can't really stop because you have priorities that you have to leverage your assets?
Yes, Senator. The fusion of intelligence, most of it coming from DEA, FBI, and they have agents in many of these countries living full time, and they work with the law enforcement, the local law enforcement. So the human intelligence is collected by them, and it is just remarkable the clarity that, and then the technical intelligence that the military provides, whether it's NSA, satellites, we've got radars that triangulate and watch the entire Caribbean. So we fuse all of that together in a place called Jadif South in Key West. And the picture we have is really remarkable. I mean, as I was mentioning in your office, oftentimes we'll know within a couple of hours when one of the go-fast, the speedboats, is going to leave Cartagena Harbor. The fact that they have 1.5 tons of cocaine on board, that there's 2 guys, one of whom is, first name is Jose, maybe have his phone number. The frustrating thing is we have insufficient airborne ISR to then really get the detail on him as he's moving, and then the end game is a law enforcement helicopter, usually Coast Guard. So we see it. It's an amazing picture, very, very clear picture. It's that we don't have the assets. Now, what we've been doing more and more since we don't have the assets, and we're getting less and less assets, although I will say the Coast Guard Commandant has made a real commitment to double the number of Coast Guard cutters, but that'll go from 3 to 6. And the Coast Guard also has an awful lot of other missions to accomplish, migration up in the Florida Straits and a lot of other things. But the point is we're working more and more with the partners. The Panamanians are very good partners in this, and they take X number of tons. The Nicaraguans, believe it or not, are cooperative in this, and then certainly the Hondurans or Guatemalans. The one thing we don't get if we, the U.S., apprehend these guys, we bring them into the federal court system, and they very quickly plea bargain, and we get an awful lot of intelligence that then goes back into the cycle. When our partners get these guys, we kind of lose that ability to interrogate them and then offer them a deal they can't refuse. But the point is, since I don't have the assets, I've got 2 Navy ships right now that'll go to 0 forever, and by the summer, and that's not even with sequestration. As I say, the Coast Guard Commandant's doubled his commitment, but that's 5 or 6 ships. So the answer now is the partners, and try to get them to play. And I have to give credit as well. We about 6 months a year will have at least 1 Canadian frigate, and they turn themselves over to us, and so we use them in the same way that we would use a Coast Guard cutter, Navy ship. The British occasionally have a ship down. The Dutch are very cooperative, but they don't have many ships in the region very often. The French out of Martinique, when they're working together with us, they plug into our system, and we work them hard.
Thank you. Another question for the both of you. Secretary Schultz was here a few weeks ago, and he was talking about the border security, and he said, when you're talking about the southern border, you need to ask the question, which southern border? That would be relating to the Mexican southern border. We know it's unsafe, and we know that 80% of the people coming across our border are not from Mexico. So there seems to be something to be said for looking at both borders and trying to figure out how to prioritize. And I want you all to speak on the subject. But in a general way, if we were giving you $1 and you were setting the border security strategy, you had $1 to spend, how much would that be spent on our southern border versus the Mexican southern border? I know it's an unfair question. You could get back with me if you need to, but I think it's important to talk about how the two are intrinsically linked.
If it's my dollar, I'm going to put it on the Mexican southern border, partnering with Sedena and Samar, helping strengthen their southern border, because Homeland Security is in charge of our border between Mexico and the United States. So I think my dollar would be better spent partnering with Mexico so we can shore up, help assist them, shore up their southern border, so it's less of a challenge up on our border.
And if I had the same dollar, I'd work my northern boundary, which is Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador.
And Mr. Chair, just if I may, just as a closing comment, I think that the comment, Admiral, in your opening comments on page 6 with respect to Iran and their trustworthiness should be emphasized by anybody who hasn't read the statements. And the last question I have is, in your discussions with leaders in Latin America, how do they feel about the current administration's policy towards Cuba?
Actually, in general, they think it's a good idea. They know, as they point out to me, that Cuba's problems are not due to American embargo or whatever. I mean, it's everyone else on the planet trades with Cuba except us. But their advice is, this is a good thing to do because now it gets everyone, all the naysayers, off your back. All of the people that would criticize the United States. But at the end of the day, they understand that that the Cubans have the worst human rights record in the Western Hemisphere. It's a completely repressive regime, and their economic problems are due to their incompetence, not due to the embargo. And so, but they think it's a good idea because it gets friend to friend. It gets people off our back in terms of they no longer can criticize us about the terrible things we've done to Cuba.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Well, I thank you both, and it's been very helpful. And again, General Kelly, we wish you every success in the future, and thank you for your service. Admiral Gortney, it's great to have you here, and I'm sure you're looking forward to next year. This hearing is adjourned.